what I want to do today is help those stressed out seniors in high school and give them some tips on some of the questions that I get a lot as a counselor and a consultant, both helping students apply as well as things that I've seen in my time as an interviewer at MIT. Okay. I'll start off. I actually, as Captain said, I don't quite understand how we introduce you, but I think you guys have the gist of it. I graduated from MIT. Since I graduated in 1998, I've been an interviewer. So whenever you apply to any of the top schools, you get an interview as part of your application, right? And so over those 19 years, I've interviewed probably 300-400 students. So I have a pretty good perspective on what makes a student a top student. What are some great things that students have done to impress me? And I've been able to know the backgrounds and what are the key things that tend to help applicants get in at a higher rate than the rest. It's also a pretty small community. I have a lot of friends who interview for other Ivy Leagues, and we compare notes. Every year we talk about, well, what did you see this year? Oh my gosh, let me tell you about this student. He was fantastic. So there's a lot of insight, not just from people who apply to MIT, but the top schools overall. We also have, I have a couple of colleagues who collectively we focus on the Ivies and the top schools. Like there's basically 10 schools that I think I get the most common focus on across all parents. The 8 Ivies, MIT, and Stanford. Right, so we have a team very much focused on that given our experience. Emily, she also graduated from MIT with 2 degrees, bachelor's and master's, but in materials. And then we have an old timer, Dr. James Sung. He was a PhD in 1976, the year I was born. So he lends a historical perspective to this. We globally at EduBridge, and you see the nice signs that I can't read, unfortunately, not only helping the top schools, but also the high schools in the U.S. and Canada, as well as any college that you might want to go to. I want to especially flash up some of the pictures and introduce Wendy because she is local here. So if you can see the face, memorize it because she is local to this community. But okay, let's get to the meat of what I want to talk about today in the content, which is I want to cover 5 things over the next hour or so, and then we'll have some time for questions. The first is there's been a lot of news recently coming out about SATs, around what the top schools are accepting, what's optional. Somebody also sued Harvard, and we actually learned a lot about how Harvard thinks about admissions through the course of that. So I'll talk about some of the insights. The second thing then is a question I get a lot in pretty much every talk I give, so I might as well just talk about it now to everybody rather than wait for Q&A, which is, okay, what's better? A 4.0 from a weak school, 3.8 from a strong school. How do colleges know the difference? And similarly, at the next level down, okay, is it better to get a 4.0 or to get an A from a regular class or a B plus or a B from an AP class? All questions like this. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The third thing then is around the interview. So the next year just around key components that you're probably facing right now if you're applying to college, or you should start thinking about now if you're a little bit younger, which is, okay, how do I have a great interview? And I'll share some tips and also explain what goes on in an interview behind the scenes. You just show up, are totally stressed out, try to talk as best you can about yourself, and then something magical happens after that. You don't know what it is. Right? So I'm going to try to demystify that and tell you, okay, what happens after that interview, and how does it play a role in the overall application evaluation? Let's talk a little bit about essays, right? And and try to impart to you the importance of looking at your application from a holistic perspective. Right? All the components need to work together. Don't look at the essay in isolation. Don't think, oh, just because I have a great transcript, I'm done, and I don't have to worry about the essay. It all has to work together. And I'll close out with, okay, mistakes. What are the common mistakes? The most common mistakes, the most damaging mistakes that I've seen, and how you can avoid them and not make those mistakes. Okay? So let's dive right in. Some of the recent changes. The first, if you're paying attention to the news here, Harvard and Princeton said, we don't want the SAT writing requirement anymore. We'll take your verbal, we'll take your math, we don't need the writing section anymore. We actually don't want it. And they join a bunch of other schools that take this approach. There are also schools that are saying, you know what, the SAT 2 or SAT subjects, right, math, physics, chemistry, those are optional. If you don't have it, it's not going to hurt you in your application. And I'll talk a little bit about why they do that. The third then, as I said, somebody sued Harvard. They said, you are discriminating against Asians. It's too hard for Asians to get into Harvard, disproportionately hard. So I'll talk about that, as well as, we're not going to decide yes or no on that, but there's actually an incredible amount of interesting insight we learned about the Harvard admissions process through this lawsuit. And then finally, for some of the younger kids, I see, our future generation of Ivy League stars here, a lot of the top high schools in America have said, we're going to get rid of AP classes. And I've had some parents ask me in a panic, oh my gosh, does that mean APs are irrelevant? What do I do now if they're getting rid of APs? And so we'll talk about, okay, what does that really mean? Okay? So let's address the first two together. So why did these schools say, I don't need the SAT writing anymore and I'm making the SAT subjects optional? It's because there's a big movement in America right now to address inequality. The reason they're saying is because, it's enough of a hardship for poor families to even pay the money to take the SAT. I don't want to make them pay additional to take the SAT subjects test. If they can't afford it, I'm going to make it optional. Guys, most of the folks in this room are probably pretty good at the SAT subjects in math, biology, chemistry, and physics. They said it's optional. They'll take it if you send it in, and they'll use it as part of your evaluation criteria. So if you even do well on those, you should take the SAT subjects. And if you're going to apply to multiple schools, there are some schools that still want these SAT subjects courses, right? MIT says, I want a math and I want a science. So there's no practical impact for most of the folks here on that piece of news. On the flip side, though, the writing is a big deal. Why? Well, so I think a lot of you have probably taken an SAT prep class, right? You do the worksheets, you do the practice exams, you listen to what they say, and all of a sudden your test scores magically go up. What it did for me, I raised it by like 150 points by doing Princeton Review 20 years ago. That is an unfair advantage for people who can afford SAT prep classes, right? That's always going to happen. But what they're saying now with these policies is, look, for the writing, I don't want to game it. I actually want to know what you can do. So I want a writing sample. I want a graded English essay that you've written, instead of something that a prep class can train you to write really well. Yikes. A lot of the students this year go, oh my God, I don't have an essay that's good. My essays are terrible. What do I do? So for the younger kids in high school right now, plan ahead. The English essays you have to write in 9th grade and 10th grade and 11th grade, don't just do the bare minimum to get by. Think about early on, what is the killer essay that's going to impress the teacher and get me a good mark on that essay that I can submit as my writing sample. So start planning early. Don't wait until you're in the 12th grade and I don't have any more English assignments before my early action applications due. What happens? Right? Or my English teacher retired last year. I can't get a copy of a graded writing sample anymore. What do I do? Right, so start thinking about that now. That's pretty important. Okay, second thing, the Harvard law, or the third thing rather, the Harvard lawsuit. Look, everybody knows it's hard to get into Harvard. Right? They took less than 5% of their students every year. It's actually really hard. It's even harder if you're a Chinese boy. So I think that is like the hardest type of student to get into Harvard. Because there's 10,000 Chinese boys who like math, have straight A's, perfect SATs, play badminton, play piano and violin, right? And volunteer at a homeless shelter or a nursing home or a tutor. There is literally 10,000 of those of that exact same profile. Harvard accepts 1,500. They can't possibly accept 1,500 Chinese boys of that profile. So, like it or not, naturally there is a smaller set of opportunities for people who fit that profile, and they have to work much harder to distinguish themselves from all the others like them. Okay, so the lawsuit was interesting because it actually tells you how Harvard thinks about evaluating these students. What it says is, okay, there's 4 criteria and an overall score. And I'm going to rate you each student from 1 to 6, and also be able to add in some comments. And the criteria is, number 1, academics. Right? Can they do the work? Are they smart? So this is GPA, this is test scores, this is APs. Number 2 is extracurriculars. Clubs, activities, accomplishments, awards. The third, and this is actually, when I compare notes with my colleagues for other schools, this is actually a little bit different. Athletics. They care about athletics. You don't necessarily have to be good at it, right? So there are plenty of people who get in without a strong athlete, but they care about that. Right? I have a student, his grades were okay. I mean, he was like any other of the Chinese boys, but he was a state champion in track. The second fastest person in California in the 800-meter run. Got him into Harvard. Right? MIT's not, well, I mean, MIT will care about that because that's quite an accomplishment, but it doesn't have the same specific call-out of athletics in the evaluation criteria. The fourth one is the mysterious one, and really what they got sued over, right, which is personal. This is your personality traits. Are you a leader? Do you have perseverance? Do you have initiative? Are you entrepreneurial? Can you make a difference in the overall community? Everybody knows, if I go to Harvard, I'm going to benefit. If you're a student and Harvard accepts you, you're going to benefit. But how is Harvard going to benefit from having you there? And how can you demonstrate that if you go to Harvard, you can contribute to the betterment of the university and the other students around you? That's what they care about, right? That's one of the critical pieces of the personal thing, right? So a lot of questions I get are focused on a small narrow piece of that. Oh, how do I become a better leader? It's not about just leadership. It's not about being a president of some club. It's about being able to have impact in your community, to be able to make the people all around you have an improved aspect of their lives. No university wants a student who's super smart, a genius, comes home from class and just locks the door and studies. There's no benefit to the university. Right? They want them to contribute, to work with others. At a minimum, to help participate in some of the research projects and, help their peers learn the material. But it's also the most intangible. And this is the one where they got sued because they think they score the Asians lower on personal than everything else. I don't know how they're going to prove it. The lawsuit's going to go on for a while, but this is super interesting. Right? And then overall is a blend of that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the mathematical average. Okay, so given all of that, look, guys, your application, the essay part of it is incredibly important. Because where else do you talk about stuff like this? I mean, there are other places, but the real key in a lot of these outside of academics lies in the essay, lies in the interview, lies in the teacher recommendations. Your transcripts only cover this part. Right? That's why it's super important to look at your application from a total perspective. Each component of it is a tool that has to work together to tell the story about you, to convince Harvard 10,000 other people look just like me. Why am I better? Why should you pick me over the 9,999 others? Okay? Finally, for the high school-oriented folks, look, what does it mean for the AP, right? So there's two questions I often get, and I'll answer the second one as well after this. So there's a group of elite high schools, private high schools in the U.S. that says, we're not going to have AP courses anymore. What does that mean? That means that they will not follow the official AP curriculum. Okay. So a lot of schools, when you offer an AP class, the AP, company ETS gives you the curriculum that you have to follow. Right? They say you have to teach this. That unit 1, it's this. Unit 2 is this. Unit 3. And so all the schools follow that. So it's great in that if I take an AP class in any high school in the country, in Canada, in the U.S., I know what is being taught. I know the content of what's being taught. Now, the teacher might be good or bad, but I know what's being taught because it's consistent. When I get a 5 on that AP exam, I know what that means, right? Because everybody takes that same exam having learned the same curriculum. The problem with that is these elite schools say, pay me $50,000 a year to go teach you this AP curriculum. That's bad marketing when there's a bunch of public schools out there that do the exact same thing, and really good ones. So they have to differentiate. This is marketing for the public, or for the private high schools. This is how they differentiate themselves from the public schools and why they should write the big check. Or you should write them the big check. All right, so at the end of the day, though, after having taken the Sidwell Friends or the Phillips Exeter math class, you still take the AP Calculus BC exam. Right, so the students will still take the exam. Because that's what the colleges care about and look at. It's just they're saying we're going to teach it a different way. We think we can teach it a better way. This is not new, though. Like as I said, there's Phillips Exeter, Andover, Duke. A lot of them, they already do this. They've done this for a while. Like Exeter doesn't have a math textbook that you can buy. They create all the material themselves. And having not gone there or seen it, I don't know if they do it better than a straight AP class, but it is, that's their value. So that's recent news. The second thing is, I promised you I'd talk about one other question that I often get around APs, which is, what's better, AP or IB? And so the answer is, it's the same. 20 years ago, when I was applying, nobody had actually heard of IB. So if you asked me that question 20 years ago, I would have said, I don't know what IB is, but APs are good. A lot has changed in the past 20 years. Now most schools know what IB is. Most schools view IB H-level, high-level classes the same as AP. So don't worry about it. Now, for me, the key difference is being a part of the IB program drags a lot of baggage with it. And I don't use that in a negative way, but it forces you to take a set of courses that you have to do. There's a set of requirements there. APs, they don't care. Right? AP says you can take AP in one subject or whatever, but if you're part of an overall IB program, it's very structured in the classes that you have to take, at least the most that I've seen. So that's the trade-off. In terms of the rigor of the program or how colleges are going to look at it, it doesn't really matter. So don't worry about it. Okay? All right, so let's move on to schools. Topic of schools. Good versus bad, what should I do? Look, at the end of the day, if a school consistently sends applicants, a high school, consistently sends applicants to a college, they're going to get to know them. If a school consistently has students accepted at that college, you're going to get to know them. The admissions group will get to know them. And that's how they figure out, okay, how hard is this class really, or how easy is this class really? Now, unfortunately, there's 26,000 public schools and 11,000 private schools just in the U.S. alone. So you're never going to be able to cover all of them. You'll never know all of them. So if you go to school where that admissions committees don't necessarily know, it's not the end of the world. If you go to a school that's not as strong and you don't have all the APs available at a great school, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean you lost your chance to get into Harvard or Princeton or Yale. What it does mean, though, is that you're going to have to work harder. You're going to have to show initiative, right? So, overall theme, no matter what school you go to, take as many APs as you can. Doesn't have to be related to your major. Show that you can take a difficult workload, that you can learn hard content, not just in your area of expertise, but in other areas as well. That you're a well-rounded learner. So me personally, look, I was a computer science major, right? So I took AP computer science, of course, and I also did calculus, biology, chemistry, physics. I also took European history. I liked European history. Right? Nothing to do with my major. I don't know that it added any value, but it was just nice to do. I was interested in it, and it helps just to show, hey, I can do hard courses, not just in math and science. So take the hardest class load that you can. If your school doesn't have APs, yikes, what do? Well, it's actually not a bad thing. You can view it as, you can say it as I give up, or you can see it as an opportunity. So we had a student, 11th grade, who came to me and said, I have no APs, and my school's not going to let me take any APs. What do I do? So what we did was say, hey, what are you interested in? And so we built a list. He self-studied for 5 APs in 11th grade. And he got 5s in all of them. Nothing to do with school. And so, look, that's an opportunity because it shows initiative. It shows, look, I am not going to let a lack of opportunity stop me. My interest and passion in the sciences and in academic career is so strong, I will create opportunity for myself. That's what we did in one of his essays. We used that to talk about his perseverance, his willingness to set stretch goals for himself, and the ability to achieve results. Right? We told a story around, I can't control what school I go to. I couldn't afford private school. I went to a school that didn't have APs. But that doesn't stop me and my desire to learn and to challenge myself. So I took a risk and I self-studied for 5 APs. And I felt like I wanted those APs because I wanted to get a head start in college. And I knew it could have actually completely ruined my chances if I didn't get 5s on all of them. But I did it anyway. I was willing to take that risk. I had enough confidence in myself, and I worked hard enough where I felt I could do it. And I did. And I'm super proud of it. And I want to tell you, Mr. Admissions Officer, about this story because I want to prove to you that I could do even more if I went to Harvard or to MIT and had infinite resources available to me. I could do so much with so little. Imagine if I had a lot. Right? And so that's an aspect of how you can turn something like that into an opportunity to show a key area of personal, right? That personal score. You can also look to other sources. The community colleges are also a great resource, especially for some of the common higher level math courses. Like, if you're telling me you're going to be a math major and want to study in math, I'd say, hey, after calculus BC, if you get the chance, I'd love to see multivariable calculus, linear algebra, differential equations. Very few schools offer that, but community colleges do. There's an opportunity there. But overall, look, just go with the most difficult and challenging course load that you can and feel comfortable with. And you should know yourself the best, right? So don't take 7 APs and get Cs in all of them. That's counterproductive. Finally, I'll close out with the A in a non-AP versus B in an AP. And I'll just be honest with you guys. Look, the caliber of the student who are going to get into the top schools will get the A in the AP. It's not a trade-off. It's not a trade-off. If you aspire to these top schools, go get the A in the AP. Go be willing to take the risk, to take the harder class, and get the good grade, because that's what you need. That's what you need to show. I don't need the math major who's not willing to take calculus. Right? I don't need the physics major who's had calculus but takes physics 1 instead of physics C. That's actually counterproductive. Because I'll say, why are you challenging yourself? finally, I'll close out with that, because I'm sure there's a lot of stressed out parents and students. It's okay not to get straight A's. You don't have to get straight A's. I didn't get straight A's. A lot of folks that I know got into MIT, that I interviewed got into MIT, didn't get straight A's. A lot of students I worked with as a coach and a counselor got into good schools, Ivy League schools, without getting straight A's. So it's okay. Because academics is just one of the criteria that you're evaluated with. Okay? Even if you have a 4.5 GPA, you can still not get in if the rest of your application isn't good. But if you have a 3.0 GPA out of 4, it might be a little tough. So if it's too low, it can hurt you. If it's close enough in the range, don't sweat it. Focus on, there's nothing you can do about it. You got the B in 9th grade, you're in 12th grade now, what are you going to do? Not apply? Right? If you don't apply, I can guarantee you won't get in. So let's just go make the best of what you have and put together the strongest application that you can. That's what I'll say about grades and GPA. So let's talk about the interview. I've done a lot of interviews. But when I was interviewing for MIT, I did about 25 a year. And here's how it works. The schools actually take this really seriously. They offer an interview to every person who completes an application. Some schools will say, hey, you know what? It's optional. You should do the interview. You should do the interview. I can't stress it. You should do the interview. It is the only chance you get to talk to a real human being about your application, about yourself. It is the only chance. Throughout the entire process, you get to talk to a real person. So you got to take advantage of it. Right? And the interviewer, I'm trained, right? The MIT tells you, Bob, this is what I want you to get out of that interview with this student. These are the things that you should say in your interview report. And I'll talk a little bit actually, what I do. Right? The interview's generally about an hour and a half. I talk for 45 minutes. I let the student ask me questions for 15. I ask questions for 45. The student asks me questions for 15. The one part of the interview you can't control is who interviews you. You get assigned. You get somebody like me. I don't know if you're lucky or not, but I know I've done this before, so I know what I'm after. I know what questions to ask. I unfortunately also know, if you've been well prepped, if you're training, if you're lying, if you're making stuff up, I can tell all that pretty easily. But I also can steer you to making sure that I know what's important about you. You could also get an interview who's doing it for the first time. You could be the first interviewer this person has ever done. What do you do then? Now, I'll tell you what you should do then in just a second. So after the interview, I fill out a form, and this is true all the schools, right? And for me, I'll spend actually more time writing up the report than in the interview. Right? I write my impressions about the student. I write text, several pages long. And then at the end, I'm asked to give score, 1 through 5. These are MIT's. It's actually pretty similar to Harvard's. Right? We just use different words. Engagement and joyfulness. Did they take initiative? Are they intellectually curious? If they like physics, how far did they go over and above classes to explore physics? Right? Some students said, I tried to build a nuclear reactor once. It's an interesting story. It shows initiative. He didn't actually do it, thankfully. But it shows curiosity, and I like that. Right? And it shows motivation. So those are characteristics for engagement and joyfulness. The second thing is personal qualities. Pretty much exactly the same as how Harvard thinks about personal. Right? Can you contribute to the community? How confident are you? And I'll talk about how you show these a little bit later. The third is pretty interesting in that this is more MIT specific, the match. Do I feel, having graduated from MIT, do I feel like this person is a good fit culturally? Because, MIT, unlike a lot of folks, it's obviously very science and technology and engineering math focused. It is research focused, more so than a fine arts or a liberal arts school, we want to know that you can collaboratively work with a team to go solve a problem. Research is not done by yourself in a lab anymore. You work with a research group. You probably work across universities to solve the toughest problems. Can you do that? Right? Can you take advantage of all the resources that are going to be available to you? Once I've done all of that, then there's one overall. The overall does not have to be the average of the three. Overall, this is my recommendation, saying, hey, what do I think? And my choices are, look, ranging from absolutely admit this person top 1% of all I've met, all applicants I've met, to 3 is typical good student. They have to have something outstanding somewhere else in order to admit them, to definitely don't. I do have a silver bullet. I like it. It's a +1. So I don't know if you guys understand the term silver bullet, but it is if I encounter a 1 in a million student, some student who's so good, who I'm so impressed with, that if they don't accept the student, I will fly to Boston and tell the admissions committee they're crazy for turning them down. I can check that box and explain why. So I do have that, and so the interview is important. I can provide an incredibly strong push and recommendation for that student. I've done it 3 times in my 19 years, and they all got in. Okay, so with that, there's a couple key things just to take away. Look, this is important, right? And we'll talk more about this in the essay section as well on these criteria. Because they're the same across most of the universities. Everybody has their own little unique flavor to it, but overall they're the same, and the things you got to do to demonstrate this stuff is the same. So how do you prepare? How do you make sure you have a great interview? The first thing you should do is figure out the story. Do not, so this is the example. What do you do if you have a person who's interviewing for the first time? Do not depend on the interviewer to draw out information from you, right? But even before the interview, actually before you even pick up pen to paper for your essays, know your story. Have a view of what are the 2 or 3 or 4 unique things about me that I want to talk about. And for each of those traits, characteristics, accomplishments, whatever, have a story and an example. People don't remember I'm a diligent student, right? Or I like to challenge myself and set stretch goals. Great. People don't remember that. People remember stories. People remember I took a risk, self-studied for 5 APs and got 5s on all of them. So have examples and have stories, because that's what's going to be powerful. You know what? I'm going to write that story in my report. I'm going to say, I evaluated this person high on engagement and joyfulness because of his initiative. And let me tell you why I think his initiative is so good. So have a story ready, have the key points. You cannot leave the interview without having told the interviewer those key points. That's the mentality you should go in an interview with. That way it doesn't matter if you get me who's done it for 20 years or you get the person who's interviewing for the very first time. You control the content. Otherwise, you're leaving yourself at the mercy of luck in who you get for the interviewer. As I interview, oftentimes I get asked, what should I bring to the interview? My answer is nothing. Just bring yourself. I just want to talk. And it's true. I just want to talk. You don't need to prepare anything for me. Just be ready to tell me about yourself. But I've never turned down a resume. If a student shows up with a resume and says, Bob, here's a resume of my accomplishments, I take it and I use it. So don't ask. Just create the resume, give it to the person. Because it will help. Even if they don't want it, they will not refuse it. They will take it and they will use it. I guarantee it. If you did something that you can show, a picture, if you like music and you can record it on YouTube, if you have an app and want to give me a demo, do it. I had one kid, he liked magic, so he did a magic trick for me at our interview. He said, I like to perform it. I do it at birthday parties and as a side business, but I really enjoy magic. It's great. It has an impact. I remember it. This was 15 years ago, and I still remember that. He went and turned around, and all of a sudden he went from shirt and tie to like a t-shirt, like without taking off his clothes. It was amazing. So the interview today is a little bit different. I think the world is a little bit more casual today, so don't wear a suit, don't wear a tie, don't wear a t-shirt either, or shorts. Just wear something normal. Wear a collared shirt and wear pants. Okay. The world's also changed that you can find out anything about anybody through the power of the internet. So learn something about your interviewer. You're going to know their name. You're going to know what school they went to. Based on that, you should be able to tell at least the person's job, what their experiences are, and anything else that they've done that's noteworthy. Do the research, do the homework, and use it. I've had a student impress me by saying, Mr. Yang, I'm really interested in computer science and specifically security. And I see that you work for a computer security company. And my email, had just gotten hacked, and I don't know how they did it. Can you tell me what you're seeing in terms of how the bad guys are attacking people? Knew something about me, tied it to his computer science interest. I could tell he knows about current events. It just shows that it's the little things, right? He shows initiative. He's willing to go the extra mile to learn something about me and relate it to him. It's the little effort. It's the person who's willing to go the extra mile versus say, what did you major in at MIT? The final thing you got to do is practice. Don't practice by reading to yourself. Say it out loud. You're going to have a list of questions. You're going to type the answers to the questions, and then you're going to read it, and you're going to realize it sounds terrible. Because written English is different than spoken English. The second and third time you edit it, it's still going to sound terrible. So keep going. Practice, practice, practice. And once you have all the content down, practice delivering it. Don't answer right away. I'll know you've rehearsed it. Practice talking about it naturally, as if you're having a conversation with me. And I'll get into a little bit more about how to practice and how to deliver. So at the interview, so all these things around confidence. You remember I saw that. Confidence is one of the things I evaluate. How do you show confidence? How do you show initiative, passion, energy? You start with shaking my hand firmly. I don't like shaking a cold, wet hand that's kind of like this. That first 5 minutes is very important because it creates. Like it or not, I want to be impartial. I want to help you, but it doesn't leave a great impression if I get a very weak, cold, nervous handshake. Talk about yourself while looking at me. My name is Bob. I'm a computer scientist. Want to go to MIT. What else? It's low energy, low everything. That makes it super hard for me. All right, so come in, practice that, practice. So, a lot of students we work with, I will tell them, look, if you're going to do well in the interview, I think you got to go do some debate or public speaking. Not because I want you to do debate, not because you should add debate to the resume, because I want you to be able to talk to a human being in a way that will make them want to talk to you. That you'll be able to have an interview with somebody and effectively communicate what you need to communicate with them about yourself. So I don't need you to do debate forever. We don't actually have to put debate on your list of activities. But I want you to have that skill, because you need that skill. And it's not just important for this college interview, it's important in life. But you got to go do this. The best students do this. I can tell how much they love physics by the way they tell me about their projects, by the way they tell me about their application, their accomplishments. Right? You can tell the energy. You can tell the body language. I'm leaning into yours. I tried out for the physics team, and I think I did a good job. Right? Compare the difference. Right? Even if I say the exact same thing, how I deliver it matters. I mean, it's well known, 30-40% of communication is nonverbal. It's important in an interview. Even more so for other schools than MIT, right? The liberal arts schools, the Harvards, the Princetons, they care even more. It's okay to be a nerd at MIT. They kind of expect that. Right? If you want to be if you're a political science major, or you want to be pre-law at Harvard, you better be able to talk about yourself in a confident, articulate way. Right? So, key skill. I already said this, right? Tell stories. And have those stories ready. The fifth thing is, give me a chance to ask questions. I had one student, I said, "Hi, Jim, tell me about yourself." And he talked nonstop for the next 35 minutes. Didn't let me say it because he had rehearsed it, right? He took practicing to the extreme. He knew exactly what he was going to say. He didn't know how to stop in the middle or anything, so he's like, "I just got to get this off my chest." And talked nonstop for 35. Half the stuff I didn't care about. And in fact, it wasn't interesting to me because it didn't tell me anything about him that could help me write that interview report or to even evaluate him. So leave me a chance. I'm not going to ask a lot of questions, but for most of the things that you tell me, I'm going to ask in a bit more detail. Okay, so let me give you an example, and this goes to a point I'm going to talk later, which is you got to not make stuff up or exaggerate, because I will know. Right? So, for example, a student will say, "You know what? I was president of the math club. I was just president. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do in the activities fair and how we're going to recruit more members." And two of the folks started arguing with each other, and I had to go in and resolve it. It was a great, conflict resolution example for me. So it said to me, right? I said, "Oh, great. Okay, so tell me, you walk into a room, these two people are just screaming at each other. What's the first thing you said to them?" Because I want that detail. It's a great story, but I want to know the detail. Number one, I want to make sure you're not making it up. Right? But I just want to know the detail, what your thought process. I'd say at that moment, when you first walked in the door, tell me what you said. And tell me how they reacted. It's a conversation. I want to know the detail behind that. Right? Did you go in and say, "You guys shut up. This is what we're going to do"? That's a form of conflict resolution. Not productive, but it is a form of conflict resolution. Right? Or do you try to mediate? Or how did you do it? The how and what you did is just as important as the accomplishment itself for me and for most good interviewers. And by the way, I'm evaluated on my interview. Every interview report I write gets graded by the admissions committee. They score me 1 through 5. And if I don't get a lot of 5s, somebody politely tells me, maybe you should think about not taking a break from interviewing next year. Okay, so schools take this very seriously. We get training. We get evaluated. We get guided on what to say, what not to say. The next tip is, look, it's actually okay to not know the answer and right away. It's okay to say, "Wow, that's a great question. Let me think about it." Okay, because that tells me you're not a robot, and it tells me that you're not rehearsing, even if you are. Right, and so, and purposefully, I will ask questions that you probably weren't ready for, because I want to see how you think on the fly, how you think on your feet. Look, the next one's out. Don't talk like a robot, right? If you listen to me talk, I have highs, I have lows, I control volume, I walk in. So don't, even if you have a great story that you have rehearsed and, have great content and it can really impress me with what you're going to say, how you say it just as much matters. Okay, so practice the speaking part. And then finally, look, you got to have good questions for me. I want to know that you've done your research around MIT. Right, so ask me MIT-related questions. "Hey, Bob, what's an example of a good question?" Well, as you know, Bob, I'm interested in artificial intelligence, and I was on the MIT website and I saw Professor Sussman is doing a lot of research on AI and customer support so that you don't have to have a real live operator. How easy is it for freshmen to get involved in research like that? Because it's something I'd really like to do, given my previous research in AI. Okay, that simple sentence has shown me he cared enough about MIT to go to the website. He looked at specific professors and content that they were working on. He tied it back to research that he has done in the past, and he's told me that, hey, look, if I went to MIT, I'm hugely motivated. I want to go work with these people and make contributions in AI. One simple sentence accomplished all of that. Okay, so what shouldn't you do? You should not come late. I had one student who forgot. He didn't show up. So I'm sitting there in Starbucks waiting at my watch. Where are you? Didn't show up. So what did I say in my interview report? I said, in my 17 years of doing this, I have never had a student not show up for the interview and forget until now. This person was the first. And I scored him low on personal. And he didn't get it. Right? So don't do that. I actually probably would have treated it a lot better if he just said, hey, look, I'm sorry, I forgot. Can we do it again? Right? But didn't do that. So don't forget. Along the lines of formality, don't call me sir. Right? Hi, Mr. Yang, sir. And the world is not so formal anymore. It actually just makes it awkward for me. Right? A lot of times, if it's not obvious to me, I will say to the student, why do you want to go to MIT? The worst answer you can give me is, I want to go to MIT because it's a great school and has a great reputation. I know that. I also know it's going to be great for you, right? I know you're probably thinking, I can go to MIT, it's got a great reputation, I'm going to get a great job. My parents and friends are all going to be impressed because my parents bragged to them that I got into MIT. There's all these great things for me. I know that, you know that, don't say it. Pretend. Pretend there's some other reason you want to go that makes me happy. That makes me think you're genuinely interested in going to MIT for some other reason, like you want to do the research or you're passionate about something. That's it. That was the second worst answer. The worst answer I ever got was, well, my parents made me apply to MIT, but I really want to go to Harvard. So I think MIT is okay. Actually, my friend at Harvard said he got the exact opposite. When at Harvard, I said, well, that student was right. We should have accepted him to MIT. Right? Because the student said, oh, I'm a computer science major. I want to go to MIT, but my parents made me apply to Harvard. Don't be my friend. I don't want to make friends with you. I was having one student prep, he said, should I make a joke? Should I try to buy him lunch? Should I whatever? Like, no. I don't need you to feed me. I don't need you to entertain me. I don't need you to make me laugh. I need you to tell me about yourself so that I can write a great report about you. So don't try to be my friend. I'm not your friend. I don't want to be your friend. I'm probably never going to speak to you again in my life after our interview. Right? But I want to write you the best interview report about you that I can. So help me accomplish that mission. All right, I talked about the talking without stopping. The final thing is, okay, I had mentioned this a couple times earlier. How do you come off not rehearsed? Right, so this is nonverbal. Okay, so sometimes, actually a lot of times, for the rehearsed students, I will ask them a question. And before I'm even done asking the question, they're ready to answer. Like, they can't wait. She's like, oh, he asked one that I had written down and I practiced before. I didn't even get to finish. And they go. Okay, don't do that. Make the pause. Pretend you're thinking. Right? And then come back and answer my question. Okay, just those are little things. And, above all, and I didn't put this down because it should be obvious, don't make stuff up. I had one student who said, this is real, this is absolutely true. I created an artificial intelligence machine learning algorithm to detect cancer in images of cells. Like, wow! What tool did you use? What algorithm did you use? How did you do it? What was the effective rate? I'm a science, I know basic science to be able to ask those questions. I don't remember. So don't do that. You'll be found out. It's not worth it. So that's the interview, guys. Let's move on to the essay. What are the secrets to a great essay, a world-class essay? So to talk about that, let's go back to the Harvard model. Academics, extracurricular, athletic, personal. Because your job in that application is to say what makes me different and unique across 40,000 other people in these 4 dimensions. So how do you do that? First, it's the entire application. And this map is going to be different for every student. You use different tools, different parts of the application to highlight different things. For this particular student, look, my academics is strong because I have phenomenal grades. I took 12 APs, and I aced the SAT. And I got 5s in all those APs. I don't need to prove any more academics, because my transcript's done that. So I'm not going to waste a single essay talking about academics. Instead, I'm going to realize that, hey, I'm a little bit weak on these other 3, so I need to spend my essays talking about my extracurriculars and my athletics, because my awards weren't strong enough there. Right? Okay, look, that state champion in track, he doesn't need the essay here. He shouldn't talk about track at all in the essay here. He should talk about something else, right? So every student, this map is different. But you have to notice, it all has to come together. They all have to work together to tell the full story. You can't just say, oh, I've got everything done. I just want to go get professional help in reviewing my essay. I need my English teacher to review my essay. You can tell a great story in an essay that absolutely has nothing to do with yourself and helping you get into college. They all have to work together. All the tools have to work together. Okay, so I actually want to give an example. I'll give 2 examples. One is my example of comparing and contrasting a good essay with a not so compelling essay. Actually, they're really both good essays, but they accomplish different things. And then I'll actually give you a real-life example. Okay, so I have a beef noodle restaurant. Now I'm going to give you 2 examples of essays to try to convince you to come to my restaurant. Okay, essay number 1. I love noodles. I've done so much research on noodles. I know that, look, noodles are different across China, Japan, Italy, Korea. You have udon, ramen, all different types. And that in the 1300s, Marco Polo went to China and brought back noodles and pasta to Italy. And it fed millions of Europeans. So noodles are super important. And spicy noodles are even more. Did you know that where your tongue tastes spice is in the back? Right? And there's actually a meter, a number that you can assign to how spicy a particular pepper is. It's called the Scofield Scale. So like a habanero pepper in Mexico or a jalapeno versus a bell pepper. Right? Versus a chili pepper. There's a variety of different peppers. And I love peppers. So come to my beef noodle restaurant. I've just told you a great factual essay with great examples on the history of noodles and on the history of spice and the science of spice. How does that help you want to come to my restaurant? Let me try version 2. I love noodles. I've flown 12,000 miles around the world on United Airlines to taste noodles in Japan, Korea, Italy, China, Vietnam. I've tasted noodles made up of rice, wheat, barley, flour. And I realized that each has a unique flavor. And I've blended them. I've combined my experience in tasting all those noodles into 5 blends in my restaurant that you will not get anywhere else in the world. And I know that the traditional Chinese restaurant serves mala in the spicy, but there's so much more. You can get that anywhere. But I've created a unique blend. I created 100 different blends of mala with a little bit of habanero, a little bit of jalapeno, some bell peppers and chili peppers thrown in. And I picked the ones that I loved and I thought were most different and most delicious. And then I hired a food critic from the local newspaper to come try them. And we agreed on the top 3. And so if you come to my restaurant, you can try the combinations of those 3 that I think are the most delicious in the world that you can't get anywhere else. Do you want to come to my restaurant? Both are equally good essays, great grammar, delivered with great passion, showed a lot of research and effort in writing the essay, but one was completely useless in having you come to my restaurant. The other says, wow, the food must be really good. Right? That's the point. A lot of essays about students will say, I can do math, I can do physics, I play the piano, I do violin, I'm on the DECA team, I've done Model UN. I already know that. That's in your activities list. I don't need this factual statement in my essays. Your essay is the chance to tell me what's unique about you, your personality, your accomplishments, why you did some of the things you did, and the things you had to overcome in order to achieve the results that you did. Okay, so that's the difference. And that's why, a lot of folks will say, look, I'll just get somebody to review my essay. I don't think you can. To have an effective review of an essay without knowing what you're trying to do in the essay in relation to every other piece of your application. Because they all have to work together. Let me give you a real life example. So, I'm going to skip over this for a second. One of the real live essay, real actual essay of a student we worked with. It's a great story. I'm not going to read it out, but I love maps when I was a kid. Other kids would play in the playground, but I love to study and read maps so much I wouldn't go out. My mom would yell at me for staying up too late. I didn't turn on enough light, so my eyes were going nearsighted, but I love maps. He was an environmental science and chemistry major. Do you think this helps? All right, so, in general, but it was a great essay. It was beautiful. It was a great story about him as a kid and how much he loved maps. 10 versions later, this is what we come up with. Right, tell the story. I was in chemistry lab one day. When you're doing chemistry experiments to protect you from dangerous particles, you put on a mask. And he looked out the window and realized, oh my gosh, these masks are what people have to wear to breathe and walk on the street in Beijing. The pollution is terrible. 1.5 billion people is inhaling this stuff. Half of them don't even have masks. At that moment, I knew I wanted to change the world. I wanted to help fix this problem. That's how I got into environmental science. We basically rewrote the entire essay, right? And we actually revised it a bunch of times. If you look at the 5th version, it actually didn't contain a lot of this, right? Because you have to change the content of all the essays based on what the other essays say. Right, because when your essays have to talk about extracurriculars, have to talk about personal qualities, and you have multiple personal qualities you want to get across, if you change one essay, you have to change all the rest to make sure you cover everything. Right, so you got to look at it holistically. So with that, let me talk about lessons learned. Look, don't even start your essay without having a plan. Right? Don't go to the supermarket and buy ingredients to cook dinner if you don't know what dishes you're going to cook. You can buy the freshest broccoli, but if you're making kung pao chicken, it's not going to be helpful. All right, so start there. Second thing is the essay is one tool. It's one of many. It all has to work together. Don't look at it in isolation. Don't look at any part of your essay or your application in isolation. The things you talk about in your interview should not overlap very much with the things you talk about in your essay. Otherwise, you've wasted an opportunity to say something new about yourself. A lot of folks call it a college application. I think it's a sales package. You are a salesperson trying to sell yourself to the university. It's a mentality change. It's not a report about you. It's selling yourself. Okay? And overall, whether it's with us or somebody else, you got to keep revising the essay. Read the first draft. You think, oh, this is pretty good. Read it again the next day. You'll probably find areas you can change. Read it again the next day. Revise it. Read it then from beginning to end. Your entire application from beginning to end. Does that essay still match up with what you're trying to say about yourself? Okay? The final thing I'll leave you guys with is the top mistakes. How do you avoid them? The first thing is the no consistent story. Right? You have a great collection of facts about yourself and things that you've done, but it doesn't add together to a person, or a person that I would want to come to MIT, or Harvard, or Yale, or Stanford. Right? Because you didn't start with the key message. You didn't start with the 2 or 3 key things that you think are important. So start with that first before you do anything else. And so related to that, don't get help for just one piece of it. Look at it holistically. And don't underestimate the importance of the recommendations and how you can influence them. I've seen countless students say, teacher, I added you to my Common App application. Can you please write me a recommendation? You have no control over what goes in there. Your teacher has no idea what to say because he or she has to do 30 of them. You have to control the message. You should be writing a note that says, teacher, I loved your class. I still remember that moment when you did that, when you lit that ball of flame under the hood in chemistry. And it made me love chemistry for the first time. Can you write a recommendation for me? Thank you in advance for your time. I would love it if you could highlight the hands-on investigative nature that I have. So please say that about me. Chances are they're going to write that. Right? And attach a resume. Because you have to control the message. Every piece of your application, you need to control it, and you need to have it all tied together to tell the full story. Okay? The third common mistake is to try to do too much. People think quantity is better than quality. So I have 50 activities. I've only done them for a year each, but I feel like I have to do it to broaden my resume. I have interviews, and in 11th grade, suddenly I decided I was really passionate about homeless people and helping them. So I decided to go volunteer at a soup kitchen over Christmas. And that's it. No other activities. I mean, don't tell me that you care about that. You did it for 3 days because you thought, oh my gosh, I don't have enough volunteer work or community service in my college application. It's very easy to tell. Right, so focus on things you're passionate about that are important to you and do them really well. Naturally, good stories will come out of that. Don't try to do too much. More is not better. The fourth thing, and I want to go back to the essay on this, is I've actually had students who there's no way in the world they wrote that essay. Right, because they score like an 85 on a TOEFL, but the vocabulary, the grammar, the structure of that essay is like a college graduate. They just don't match, so be careful. It's actually okay if your English is not great, you make some mistakes on your essay as long as it's consistent. Right? You can't get a 500 on the SAT verbal section and write a perfect paper. Right? It's just not going to happen. If I see that, I'm not going to believe it. I'm going to know you got help. And then I'm going to start doubting the rest of your application, how much of it is real. And we had an essay contest recently. My submissions came in. One of them was like, oh my God, I was super impressed. It was like one of the best essays I've ever read. And then there were simple grammatic mistakes and incorrect use of words. Why? Probably because the student had professional help in writing the essay and then wanted to make some changes themselves. Oops. The final thing I'll leave you with is, look, don't try to, just as GPA, some things don't matter. I've had people ask, oh my God, I only got a 1550 on the SAT. Should I take it again to get 1580? No, of course not. Right? At that level, it's not going to matter. It's not worth the effort. The time that you're going to go sit in that SAT prep class, I'd rather you do some other activity that's actually going to help your resume. So don't try to fine-tune this stuff. Okay, it's not going to matter whether you got a 1550 or even a 1600. That's not going to get you into Harvard. You've already checked that academic box. Now, if you get a 1300, that's a different discussion, right? But don't try to get that little bit extra, because that's not going to matter.